organising, networking at a national level of people involved in squats and autonomous spaces, which was really important. Yeah, we met and networked with loads of people in loads of different cities, and just simply sharing stories of what was going on was really inspiring and really kind of productive for our own practice back in our own cities. But it also meant that there was, you know, basic things like an email network, more communication. And at a local level in Bristol, we formed a group and kind of did a series of kind of temporary, quite spectacular squatted spaces, tying in with local struggles, you know, from gentrification to sort of ecological stuff, arms trade stuff, a variety of different things. And through to more kind of like performance-based, like we did a high-grade restaurant that was free, and a speakeasy quite recently. But all kind of, you know, there's tensions with all these things, of course, but, you know, fun stuff as well. And I suppose one of the lasting things that's come out of that, well, semi-lasting, we then began to critique, in Bristol at least, we then began to critique those temporary spaces that we were doing in a similar way that the alter-globalisation stuff had been critiqued in the early 2000s, and we felt, no, we need to do something that's lasting and more relevant to a mythical community that, you know, we think exists just beyond our doors. And so I'm getting quite city-specific here. We squatted a building to form a permanent social centre. And, you know, Bristol at that time had Cabelli, permanent social, you know, it's been there since '94. It now had the factory, huge social centre. Bristol's got under 1 million people. It then had the factory, it had Classics, a free shop, like squatted, permanent free shop, open every day, workshops upstairs, providing housing to people as well. It had a gallery, squatted gallery next door, and a squatted library across the road. So like for such a small place, we really felt like we are running this city, from our subcultural perspective. And there's been a massive crackdown since then, but, you know, and obviously these things come and go in waves, but it did feel quite potent kind of this time last year. So I suppose the next big thing that's happened has been the change in the law, and in a similar way to the international call-out, that has prompted a new round of national organising. So people coming together about how do we contest the law. Obviously that itself is ridden with tensions. So Bristol always tends to do its own thing compared to the rest of the UK, so I can only really speak from that perspective. We decided to not fight around the law stuff, because although we felt generally you fight where you stand and you use the law available to you, that to demand protection under the law was, I mean, it's a can of worms, but I just want to highlight the tension that, yeah, to demand protection under the law was to authorise the power of the state to protect us, which we didn't want to do. But it's not clear cut, and there were multiple different perspectives, and a lot of people in the UK and London have done some good work around it. I mean, other tensions that emerged around that were, oh, do we now have to look good in the media? And are we gonna so a lot of people at that time saying, no, we have to present a good face of squatters in the media because we need to convince the politicians that we're nice people. And a lot of people were saying, no, to them, we are not nice people, and to us, they are not nice people. That's it, we do what we do, and when they try and stop us, we will try and stop them, but we're not going to. But it's tricky, it's really tricky. It's really easy to get holier than thou, kind of more radical than thou on everything, and actually for us to say that in Bristol was a lot easier, because if a squat's facing eviction, we have a network of people that can be mobilised very, very quickly. So within 10 minutes there'll be 5 people there, within 20 minutes there'll be 20 people, like outside a squat that's being evicted from a text phone tree immediately. So for us to say fuck the law we've got numbers. But some outlying smaller city where there's 3 squats and there isn't that network, so it's then if there isn't that protection, how do you build networks? Other tensions, I'll just run through some other tensions quickly that are kind of probably common, well, I would assume are common to kind of autonomous spaces here. So stuff around safer spaces and anti-oppression, the degree to which squats, there have been attempts at squatting with migrants in the UK that haven't been as successful, partly because of the precarious nature of these spaces. I suppose, the ghettoisation stuff, which is, a common theme. Police repression in the wake of the summer riots. There have been raids, arrests, and people have had to go into hiding, and there has been police repression. The police claim that they have 2 people working undercover in Bristol alone. Whether that's a claim, whether the work that kind of stuff does is in creating paranoia, or whether they actually have people, who knows? But it's the claim that they've made, and we've got there's been big public, I don't know if people are aware, but there's been big public outings of cops who've been deeply involved in UK social movements and European social movements. I think that's a sort of off the cuff, quick rundown, and please chip in if I've missed anything.
I just want to mention Sunday night at the 16 Beaver Group at 7 p.m. after hours event is called for Occupy London is going to be meeting with people.
Maybe I should tell something about Spain, or maybe you can compliment me before, after, if you like. So, I would like to start with a story about a recent eviction which happened in September 2011. It was in the Basque Country. The name was Cucucha. It was a very international sounded eviction because this squat lasted for 13 years. 13 years is a lot of time. Yeah, 3 different spaces, but the last one was 13 years, I think. The other one were just a few days more. So, I mean, there is another squat in Barcelona, which is still a squat after more than 25 years or something like that. It's Casa de la Montaña. These are just few examples that squatting is possible and sometimes can last for a long time without being legal. But of course, I agree that the nature of squatting in general is a temporary one. It's something that lasts few days, few weeks, few months, sometimes few years. But nobody who squats expects to live for the rest of their lives in a squat. But sometimes it happens that you have chances, opportunities to remain, to be legal, to make a deal with the owner, with the municipality, with the state. It doesn't matter. There are too many options, but they are only open once you are squatting, once you are practicing a direct action against private property. So for me, this is the main lesson I learned when I was a student and I joined the movement, and I said, okay, this is a wonderful political movement. But I would like to stress a little bit what is political squatting, maybe if is there any difference with social squatting or other practices of squatting. In the case of Spain, as you know, we had a dictatorship for 40 years, and after the dictatorship, during the transition times to democracy in the late 70s, there was a very powerful citizen neighborhood trying to promote change in the political system. But in the first 80s, a great part of this neighborhood movement disappeared, or they declined at least. So at that moment, young people had not too many references, and one of the main movements which started at that period in the mid-80s was the squatters movement. But it was not the first time that squatting was in Spanish life. During the transition to democracy, the anarchist union at that moment, there was only one at that moment. They split in 1979 in 2, 3, 4 branches. But at that moment, they decided to squat as a tactic to reclaim their buildings that they couldn't recover after the dictatorship, because they had a big stock of buildings before the dictatorship, the same as other unions, but they didn't have the right to recover that building. So they started to squat, but they only wanted the property of the buildings. And that was a good reference for the new generation of political activists, because they reclaim as part of this anarchist tradition. But the squatters movement, as the anti-militaries or peace movement in Spain or feminist movement, were not or cannot be identified as anarchists only. This is just one of the multiple traditions and multiple sources. But the true thing is that the experiences of squatting in other European countries, as UK, Netherlands, Germany, and especially in Italy, were an example for this new generation of people without fathers, of political fathers, and they decided to imitate most of the experiences of social centers and political squatting in these countries. Housing was not a real problem at that moment in the first 80s, but housing was also one of the options for squatters. So for me, one of my arguments always trying to understand this history is that social centers were in the core aspect of the movement, of the squatters movement. Some activists also were squatting houses, some activists never squat houses. There were squatting of houses apart from the movement, because squatting houses was also a tradition for some minorities, like the Gypsies, for example. But they were organized by themselves, and they had no clear connections with the squatters. Even sometimes there were fights against both. It depends on your place. So since the mid-80s, the movement started to grow, and it acquired a great strength due to the situation. The legal situation at that moment was very favorable to the movement. It was not a crime, it was just a civil offense. So the movement also established close relationships with other social movements, which were also merged at that period, like the environmental one, the peace movement, the feminist movement, and some others, the students' movement, of course. But what happened? In 1995, the progressive government of the Partido Socialista, which was ruling the country from 1982 until 1996, they decided to promote a new penal code, and they decided to eliminate all of these new radical political movements, as the squatters one. There were squat houses and squat social centers in most of the cities in Spain at that moment, in 1995, but the new penal code was passed on, so in 1996 it was applied. And the curious thing was that facing this new repression of the movement decided to react and decided to occupy more and more. And these years, between 1995 and 1998, 1999, there was a huge heyday of the movement, of the squatters movement in Spain, as a reaction against this new criminalization of squatting. The first one and the most famous case was in Barcelona, Cine Princesa, which was a huge battle against the police. The biggest demonstration ever in Spain defending squatters also took place in that year, in